David Martinez counted his last $2 as his hungry daughter asked for breakfast. The eviction notice glared from the kitchen table. In 3 hours, one split-second decision to save a stranger's life would transform their world forever. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they wear work boots and broken hearts. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. But 3 months ago, a man I had never met showed me what real courage looks like. He risked everything to save my life, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that I would be safe. His bravery reminded me that voices matter. Not just the singing kind, but the kind that speak up for others, that choose compassion over indifference, that refuse to walk away when someone needs help. Sophie looked directly at David and Emma, her eyes shining with unshed tears. This first song is dedicated to David Martinez and his daughter Emma, who taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up for each other when it matters most. The orchestra began with soft, gentle notes that seemed to float through the air like whispered promises. When Sophie began to sing, her voice was pure and crystalline, filled with an emotional depth that brought immediate tears to David's eyes. She sang about hope rising from darkness, about finding strength in vulnerability, about the courage to trust again after being broken. As she sang, David thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. He thought about that rainy morning when despair had seemed like the only reality, about the split-second decision that had changed all their lives, about the unexpected connections that had transformed strangers into family. Emma reached over and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his scarred ones. "She's singing about us, isn't she, Dad?" "She's singing about hope, sweetheart," David whispered back. "She's singing about what happens when people choose to care about each other." Sophie performed 5 songs in total, each one more powerful than the last. She sang classical arias that showcased her technical brilliance, contemporary pieces that demonstrated her emotional range, and finally, the song she had written herself, a haunting melody about second chances and the voices that call us back to ourselves. By the time she finished her final note, there wasn't a dry eye in the concert hall. The audience erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever, and Sophie stood on that stage with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that she had not only reclaimed her voice but had found it stronger than ever before. After the concert, Sophie found David and Emma backstage, still glowing with the joy and adrenaline of her triumphant performance. She hugged them both tightly, and David could feel her trembling with excitement and relief. "You did it," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sophie, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You didn't just find your voice again, you found something even more powerful." "What's that?" Sophie asked, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. "You found your purpose," Emma said suddenly, surprising both adults with her insight. "You found out that your voice can help other people feel better, just like Dad's hands help build things that keep people safe." Sophie knelt down to Emma's level, taking her small hands in her own. "Emma, you're so wise. And speaking of voices, I think it's time for you to start sharing yours with the world too." Over the following months, their unlikely family continued to grow stronger. David started his new job at Wellington Construction Management, where he discovered that his years of hands-on experience made him an excellent supervisor and mentor to younger workers. For the first time in his adult life, he had weekends off, health insurance, and the luxury of being able to plan for Emma's future. Sophie kept her promise to teach Emma how to sing, and their weekly lessons became a highlight of everyone's week. Emma's natural musicality blossomed under Sophie's patient guidance, and soon she was performing in school concerts and local talent shows with growing confidence. But more importantly, Sophie had become the big sister Emma had never had, and Emma had become the little sister Sophie had always wanted. They shared secrets and dreams, helped each other with homework and life problems, and created the kind of bond that transcends blood relationships. 1 year after that life-changing morning on Maple Street, David stood in the same spot where everything had begun. But instead of rushing to work with worry gnawing at his heart, he was walking Emma to school with joy and contentment filling his chest. Sophie was with them, no longer dependent on crutches but walking with only the slightest limp, a reminder of her journey rather than a limitation. She had just announced her acceptance into the prestigious Juilliard School, where she would continue her musical education while also studying music therapy to help other trauma survivors find their voices. "Dad," Emma said as they reached her school, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't saved Sophie that day?" David looked at his daughter, now 9 years old and radiant with confidence and happiness. He looked at Sophie, whose smile could light up entire concert halls. He thought about his own transformation from a man barely surviving to someone who was truly living. I think, David said slowly, choosing his words carefully, that everything happens for a reason even when we can't see it at the time. Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives are actually doorways to something beautiful we never could have imagined. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Like voices in a choir, she said. One voice is beautiful on its own, but when many voices come together in harmony, they can create something that touches people's souls. As Emma ran into school and Sophie headed to her own classes, David walked to work with a lightness in his step that still amazed him. He thought about the man he had been just 1 year ago, desperate, struggling, barely holding on to hope. He thought about the man he was now, secure, purposeful, surrounded by love and meaningful relationships. The transformation hadn't been just about money or job security, though those things had certainly changed their daily reality. The real change had come from understanding that we are all connected, that helping others ultimately helps ourselves, that acts of courage and kindness create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. That evening, the three of them gathered around David's dinner table, now in a larger apartment with actual dining room furniture and windows that looked out on a tree-lined street. Sophie had become such a regular presence in their lives that they had set a permanent place for her, and twice a week she joined them for what they laughingly called family dinner. I have news, Sophie announced, her eyes twinkling with excitement. My album is being released next month, and I want you both to be the first to hear the title track. She pulled out her phone and played a song she had been working on in secret. Her voice, now fully mature and stunningly powerful, sang about a single father's love, a little girl's resilience, and a young woman's journey back to herself. It sang about the family we choose, the voices that call us home, and the courage to believe in second chances. The song painted a musical picture of their story, the desperation and hope, the sacrifice and gratitude, the healing and growth that had brought them together. As the final notes faded, David realized that this was what happiness actually felt like. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love, purpose, and unshakable connection. I love it, Emma said, wiping tears from her eyes. It sounds like our story. It is our story, Sophie replied. All of us together. In that moment, sitting around their dinner table with their chosen family, David understood that the day he took a bullet to protect a girl on crutches wasn't just the day he saved Sophie's life. It was the day all of their lives truly began. The day they learned that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up for each other when it matters most. Outside their windows, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Somewhere, other families were struggling, other people were finding their voices, other acts of courage were changing lives in ways that wouldn't be understood for years to come. But in their home, in this perfect moment, three voices joined together in laughter and love, creating a harmony that would echo through all their tomorrows. The story that began with a single act of bravery had become a symphony of second chances, proving that sometimes the most powerful voice of all is the one that chooses to speak up for others, no matter what it costs. And in the end, they had all found something worth singing about. #the voice that changed everything. The rain fell hard on the cracked pavement of Maple Street. David Martinez stood at his kitchen window, watching the water pool in the potholes outside his small apartment. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't notice. His mind was somewhere else, lost in the pile of unpaid bills scattered across his kitchen table. "Dad, I'm hungry," came a small voice from behind him. David turned to see his 8-year-old daughter Emma standing in the doorway, her dark hair messy from sleep. She wore the same faded pajamas she'd been wearing for 3 days. He had meant to do laundry, but the washing machine was broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. "I know, sweetheart," David said, forcing a smile. "Let me see what we have." He opened the refrigerator, knowing what he would find. A half-empty carton of milk that was probably going bad, some leftover bread, and a jar of peanut butter with maybe 2 spoonfuls left. It wasn't enough for both of them. "How about peanut butter toast?" he suggested, his heart breaking at his own words. Emma nodded, but David could see the disappointment in her eyes. She was too young to understand why they never had the foods her friends talked about at school. Too young to know that her father worked 2 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment. David had been raising Emma alone since her mother left 3 years ago. Sarah had walked out one Tuesday morning, leaving only a note that said she couldn't handle this life anymore. She never called, never sent birthday cards, never asked about Emma. It was as if they had never existed to her. Since then, David worked at a construction site during the day and cleaned offices at night. He slept 4 hours if he was lucky. His body ached constantly, his hands were rough and scarred, but he never complained. Emma was his world and he would do anything for her. As Emma ate her toast, David checked his phone. 3 missed calls from the landlord. The rent was due yesterday and he was $200 short. His stomach twisted into knots. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked, looking at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of himself. "I'm fine, baby," he lied. "Just tired." After Emma finished eating, David helped her get ready for school. Her shoes were getting too small, and one of the laces was held together with tape. Her backpack had a hole in it that he tried to fix with duct tape. Every morning, seeing her like this made him feel like he was failing as a father. They walked to school together as they did every day. David couldn't afford a car, and the bus route didn't go near Emma's school. The walk was 15 minutes each way, but he didn't mind. It was time he got to spend with his daughter. "Will you pick me up today?" Emma asked as they reached the school gate. "Of course," David said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be right here at 3 o'clock. But as he walked to work, David's phone rang. It was his boss at the construction site. "David, I need you to stay late today. We're behind schedule and the client is breathing down our necks," his boss said. David looked at his watch. If he stayed late, he wouldn't make it to pick up Emma. He would have to ask Mrs. Chin, their elderly neighbor, to get her again. He hated asking for favors, but he had no choice. "Okay," David said. "I'll stay." The day dragged on. David's back screamed in pain as he lifted heavy materials and worked under the hot sun. All he could think about was Emma, probably wondering why Mrs. Chen was picking her up instead of him. He had promised to be there. By the time David got home that evening, he was exhausted. Mrs. Chen was waiting for him in the hallway with Emma. "She's been asking for you all afternoon," Mrs. Chen said gently. She seemed worried. David knelt down and hugged Emma tightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Work ran late." "It's okay, Dad," Emma said, but he could hear the sadness in her voice. That night, after Emma went to bed, David sat at his kitchen table and stared at the bills. No matter how he added and subtracted, he couldn't make the numbers work. They were going to lose their apartment. They were going to end up on the street. He put his head in his hands and for the first time in months he cried. The next morning started like any other. David made Emma breakfast with the last of their food and walked her to school. But as they crossed Maple Street, something was different. A young girl was struggling to cross the busy street. She looked about Emma's age, maybe a little older, and she was on crutches. One of her legs was in a heavy brace, and she moved slowly and carefully. Cars were honking, drivers were getting impatient, and the girl looked terrified. "Dad, she needs help," Emma said, tugging on David's sleeve. David looked at the girl and felt his heart break. She reminded him of Emma, vulnerable and scared. Without thinking, he ran into the street. "Hey," he called to the drivers. "Give her a minute." He reached the girl just as a red pickup truck came speeding around the corner. The driver was looking at his phone, not paying attention to the road. David saw what was about to happen and time seemed to slow down. The truck was heading straight for the girl. She couldn't move fast enough on her crutches. David didn't think, he just acted. He pushed the girl out of the way and felt the truck slam into his side. Pain exploded through his body as he hit the ground. He could hear Emma screaming his name, could hear brakes screeching and people shouting. But all he could think about was whether the girl was safe. "Is she okay?" he gasped to someone standing over him. "The girl, is she okay?" "She's fine," a voice said. "You saved her. Don't try to move." David closed his eyes and felt darkness pulling him under. He woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. His left leg was in a cast, his ribs were bandaged and every part of his body hurt. But he was alive. Emma was sleeping in a chair next to his bed, her small hand holding his. When she saw him open his eyes, she started crying. "Dad, you're okay," she sobbed. "I'm okay, baby," David whispered, even though he wasn't sure if that was true. "I'm okay." A nurse came in and explained his injuries. His leg was broken, he had 3 cracked ribs and a concussion. He would be in the hospital for at least a week, and then he would need months to recover. David's heart sank. He couldn't work. He couldn't pay their bills. They were going to lose everything. Over the next few days, people came to visit. Mrs. Chin brought Emma every day after school. Some of David's co-workers stopped by. Even his boss came, though he had to tell David that he couldn't hold his job while he recovered. But on the 4th day, someone unexpected walked into his room. It was the girl he had saved, walking slowly on her crutches. Behind her was an older man in an expensive suit. "Hello," the girl said shyly. "My name is Sophie." "Hi, Sophie," David said, smiling despite his pain. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," she said. "Because of you. You saved my life." The man in the suit stepped forward. Mr. Martinez, my name is Robert Wellington. Sophie is my granddaughter. David recognized the name. Wellington Industries was one of the biggest companies in the city. Robert Wellington was a millionaire. Sophie wanted to come thank you personally, Mr. Wellington continued. What you did was incredibly brave. Sophie moved closer to David's bed. I was so scared, she said quietly. I've been scared to cross streets ever since my accident. But when I saw you risk your life for me, someone you didn't even know, it changed something in me. What kind of accident? David asked gently. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. A car hit me 6 months ago. I was in a coma for 2 weeks. When I woke up, my leg was badly damaged. The doctor said I might never walk normally again. David's heart ached for her. I'm sorry that happened to you. But that's not the worst part, Sophie continued. The worst part is that I lost my voice. David looked confused. But you're talking to me now. Sophie shook her head. I stopped singing. I used to love to sing. It was my favorite thing in the world. But after the accident, I couldn't do it anymore. I was too sad, too scared. I felt broken. Mr. Wellington put his hand on Sophie's shoulder. She hasn't sung a single note since the accident. We've tried everything, therapy, specialists, even the best voice coaches in the country. Nothing worked. Sophie looked directly at David. But yesterday when I got home from the hospital after you saved me, something amazing happened. I started singing. For the first time in 6 months, I sang. David felt tears forming in his eyes. That's wonderful, Sophie. It's because of you, she said. Seeing someone be so brave, so selfless, it reminded me that there's still good in the world. That there are still people worth singing for. Mr. Wellington cleared his throat. Mr. Martinez, I want to do something for you. Sophie told me about your situation, how you're a single father, how you work 2 jobs, how you struggle to make ends meet. David felt embarrassed. He didn't want charity, especially not from strangers. I don't need anything, David said. I'm just glad Sophie is okay. Please, Sophie said. Let us help you. You gave me my voice back. Let me give you something back. Mr. Wellington pulled out an envelope. This is enough money to cover your medical bills, your rent for the next year, and living expenses while you recover. I also have a job offer for you at my company when you're ready to work again. It pays well and it has excellent benefits. David stared at the envelope, hardly believing what he was hearing. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Sophie said firmly. Do you have children? A daughter, David said. Emma. She's 8. Then accept it for her, Sophie said. The way you protected me, you protect her every day. Good fathers deserve good things. David thought about Emma, about all the times he'd had to tell her no, all the things he couldn't give her, all the promises he'd had to break. Okay, he whispered. Thank you. Sophie smiled, the first real smile David had seen from her. There's one more thing, she said. I'm having a concert next month to raise money for children's hospitals. It will be my first time singing in public since my accident. I want you and Emma to be there as my special guests. We would be honored, David said. After Sophie and her grandfather left, Emma came to visit. David told her about the amazing offer, and she hugged him as tightly as she could without hurting his ribs. Dad, does this mean we won't have to move? Emma asked. No, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. And can I get new shoes? David laughed despite his pain. Yes, baby. You can get new shoes. Over the next few weeks, David recovered slowly. Sophie visited him several times, and each time she seemed a little brighter, a little more confident. She told him about her preparations for the concert, how nervous but excited she was. I've been practicing every day, she said during one visit. My voice is getting stronger. I'm proud of you, David said. It takes courage to get back up after something knocks you down. I learned that from you, Sophie said. The night before David was discharged from the hospital, Sophie called him. Mr. Martinez, she said, and her voice was different, stronger, happier. I wanted you to know something. Today, I walked across Maple Street by myself for the first time since my accident. David felt his chest fill with pride. Sophie, that's incredible. I kept thinking about what you did, she said. How you weren't afraid. It gave me courage. You were always brave, David said. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us. When David finally went home, their little apartment felt different. Mr. Wellington had arranged for it to be cleaned and restocked with food. There were new clothes for Emma, new shoes, and even some toys. But the best part was seeing Emma's face light up with joy. Dad, is this really all ours? She asked, looking around in wonder. It's really all ours, David said. The month passed quickly. David went to physical therapy every day and slowly got stronger. Emma did better in school, no longer distracted by hunger or worry. They were a family healing together. The night of Sophie's concert arrived. David wore his only good shirt, and Emma wore a beautiful new dress that Mr. Wellington had sent over. They arrived at the concert hall to find hundreds of people there. Sophie's grandfather met them at the entrance. "She's been talking about you two all week," he said. "She's nervous, but she says knowing you're here makes her feel brave." They were seated in the front row. When the lights dimmed and Sophie walked onto the stage, David felt his breath catch. She looked so small under the bright lights, but she stood tall and confident. "Good evening," Sophie said into the microphone. 6 months ago I lost my voice. Not literally, but I stopped believing I had anything worth saying, anything worth singing. I was in a dark place, full of fear and sadness. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But 2 weeks ago, a man I had never met showed me what real courage looks like. He risked his life to save mine, asking for nothing in return. His bravery reminded me that my voice matters, that my songs matter, that I matter. Sophie looked directly at David and Emma. "This first song is for him and for his daughter, and for everyone who has ever felt broken but found the strength to sing again." The music started, soft and gentle. When Sophie began to sing, her voice was pure and beautiful, filled with emotion that brought tears to David's eyes. She sang about hope, about finding light in darkness, about the courage to keep going when everything seems impossible. As she sang, David thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. He thought about all the struggles, all the pain, all the times he had wanted to give up. But he also thought about Emma, about Sophie, about the connections that make life worth living. When Sophie finished her song, the audience erupted in applause. But she wasn't done. She sang 4 more songs, each one more powerful than the last. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. After the concert, Sophie ran to David and Emma, still glowing with the joy of performance. "You did it," David said, hugging her carefully. "You found your voice." "We both did," Sophie said. "You found yours when you chose to help a stranger. I found mine when I chose to sing again." Emma tugged on Sophie's dress. "Will you sing for us again sometime?" Sophie smiled. "Anytime you want." Months later, David started his new job at Wellington Industries. It was different from construction work. He wore a suit, worked in an office, and had his own desk. But the best part was that he could pick Emma up from school every day. Sophie became like family to them. She visited often, sometimes bringing her guitar to sing for Emma. She was walking better every day, and her confidence grew stronger with each performance. One evening, as David tucked Emma into bed, she asked him a question that surprised him. "Dad, why did you save Sophie that day?" David thought for a moment. "Because it was the right thing to do." "But you got hurt," Emma said. "Sometimes doing the right thing means getting hurt," David explained. "But look at all the good that came from it." Sophie got her voice back, "We got a better life and we gained a wonderful friend." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be brave like you and Sophie." "You already are, sweetheart," David said. "You were brave every day when we didn't have much food, when I had to work late, when things were hard. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." A year later, Sophie gave another concert. This time, she dedicated it to all the everyday heroes who make the world a better place with their kindness and courage. David and Emma were in the front row again, watching their friend shine. After the concert, as they walked home together, Emma surprised David with her own song. She had been secretly taking voice lessons with Sophie, and her small voice filled the evening air with a melody about love, family, and never giving up. David realized that his daughter had found her voice too. That night, as David sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he had once stared at unpaid bills with desperation, he wrote a letter to Sophie. "Dear Sophie, a year ago you called me your voice, but I think you had it wrong. You were always your own voice. I just helped you remember how to use it. What you gave me was much more than money or a job. You gave me hope. You showed me that sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead to the most beautiful ones. You taught me that courage is contagious and that when we help others, we help ourselves. Emma asks about you every day. She practices the songs you taught her and talks about growing up to be brave like you. You've given her something I never could, a role model who shows her that being different, being hurt, being scared doesn't make you weak. It can make you stronger. Thank you for giving our family a second chance. Thank you for showing us that voices, whether singing or speaking up for others, have the power to change everything. With love and gratitude, David." 3 years after that rainy morning on Maple Street, David stood in the same spot where he had once saved Sophie's life. But now, instead of rushing to work with worry in his heart, he was walking Emma to school with joy in his step. Sophie was with them, no longer on crutches but walking with only a slight limp. She had just announced her engagement to a young musician she met at one of her concerts. Emma was chattering excitedly about being the flower girl at the wedding. "Dad," Emma said as they reached the school, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't saved Sophie that day?" David looked at his daughter, now 11 years old, confident and happy. He looked at Sophie, radiant with success and love. He thought about his own life, the job he loved, the financial security, the peace of mind that came with knowing he could provide for his family. "I think," David said slowly, "that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes we don't see the reason right away. Sometimes it takes years to understand. But I believe that every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every time we choose to help instead of walking away, it creates ripples that spread farther than we can imagine." Sophie nodded. "Like voices," she said. "One voice can start a song, but it takes many voices to make it beautiful." As Emma ran into school and Sophie headed to her recording studio, David walked to work with a lightness in his step he had never felt before. He thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, desperate, struggling, barely holding on. He thought about the man he was now, stable, hopeful, surrounded by love. The difference wasn't just the money or the job, though those things had certainly helped. The difference was the understanding that we are all connected, that helping others helps ourselves, that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up when someone needs us. That evening at the family dinner table, now in a larger apartment with a view of the park, David, Emma and Sophie, who joined them twice a week, shared their stories from the day. "I have an announcement," Sophie said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "My new album comes out next month and I want you to hear the title track. I wrote it about us, about our story." She pulled out her phone and played the song. Her voice, now strong and sure, sang about a single father's love, a little girl's courage, and an injured young woman who found her way back to joy. It sang about second chances, about the family we choose, about the voices that call us home. As the song ended, David realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of problems or pain, but the presence of love, purpose, and connection. It felt like coming home to people who understood your story and chose to be part of it anyway. "I love it," Emma said, wiping tears from her eyes. "It sounds like us." "It is us," Sophie said. "All of us. Our voices together." And in that moment, sitting around their dinner table with their chosen family, David understood that the day he took a bullet to save a girl on crutches wasn't just the day he saved Sophie's life. It was the day all of their lives truly began. Outside, the sun set over Maple Street, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Somewhere, other families were struggling, other people were finding their voices, other acts of courage were changing lives in ways that wouldn't be understood for years to come. But in this apartment, in this moment, 3 voices joined together in laughter and love, creating a song that would echo through all their tomorrows. The story that began with a single act of bravery had become a symphony of second chances, proving that sometimes the most powerful voice of all is the one that chooses to speak up for others, even when it costs everything.